The most powerful economic networks are the ones you never see. Across the vast, sun-scorched deserts of the Sahara, Arabia, and Central Asia, a silent transformation took place for centuries, quietly stitching together the economies of 3 continents. This is the story of how caravan routes, those lines drawn across emptiness, performed a deep and permanent rewiring of Afro-Eurasia. By the end, you will understand how our modern, connected world was born not on the open sea, but in the heart of the desert. How did these landscapes of extreme hardship become the hidden arteries for everything from gold and spices to paper and prayers? And what force was powerful enough to move treasures across 1,000 miles of sand? What does it mean for a place to be empty when it is actually full of motion? A desert does not divide, it directs. Our modern eyes see a barren wasteland, a place to be crossed as quickly as possible. But for the merchants and guides of antiquity, the Sahara or the Taklamakan was not an empty barrier. It was a corridor with very specific, very strict rules. The very things that make a desert formidable, its scarcity of water and absence of easy forage, are what forged it into a perfect engine for long-distance trade. You could not wander aimlessly. Survival depended on knowing exactly where the next hidden well lay, the next sheltered valley, the next oasis where date palms offered shade and rest. This necessity carved predictable pathways into the wilderness, like invisible highways drawn not by engineers but by thirst, and where travel is predictable, it becomes controllable. Where it is controllable, it can be taxed, protected, and turned into a system. So these narrow ribbons of known passage, threading between dunes and mountain passes, acted as natural funnels. They concentrated all the movement, all the wealth, all the people and ideas of 3 continents into manageable streams. Think of it not as a wall, but as a sieve, designed by geography itself to filter and guide the flow of history. The desert's harshness did not isolate communities. It forced them into a shared dependency on these precise routes, creating the first fragile strands of a continent-spanning web. But who built the stations along these sand-swept roads, and what kind of society could thrive in the middle of nothing? The key to unlocking these corridors was not found in a blueprint, but in a biological breakthrough. To cross a sea of sand, you need a ship built for the environment, and history provided one in a most unlikely form, the single-humped dromedary camel. This was not a simple matter of finding a beast of burden. It was a slow-motion revolution in transportation technology. The camel's domestication, perfected in the Arabian Peninsula around 3,000 years ago, offered a solution so perfectly tailored to desert logistics it seems almost designed for the task. Here was a creature that could travel for over a week without water, deriving moisture from the dry plants it ate. Its broad, padded feet did not sink into soft sand like the hooves of horses or oxen. Its long eyelashes and closable nostrils sealed out dust storms. The camel was in essence a living, breathing all-terrain vehicle, engineered by evolution for the very challenges that halted other species. But the animal itself was only the first component of a much larger technological package. The true genius emerged in what humans built for it, the specialized saddle. Early attempts simply threw packs over the camel's back, but this was inefficient and could injure the animal on month-long treks. The innovation that changed everything was the North Arabian saddle, a rigid wooden frame that sat firmly atop the hump. This was not for riding, it was for cargo. This design distributed weight evenly and allowed for massive loads, sometimes exceeding 500 pounds, to be securely fastened. With this saddle, a single camel could carry the equivalent of a small cartload of goods, and a caravan of hundreds became a moving warehouse, a freight train traversing continents without a single rail or road. The saddle transformed the camel from a transport animal into a high-capacity biological freight vehicle, the undisputed engine of desert commerce. Yet even the perfect vehicle is useless without a map and a pilot. This is where the final and perhaps most vital piece of the technology package came in, the deep environmental knowledge of the desert guides. These were not mere travelers, they were master navigators of a trackless ocean. They committed to memory a celestial map, reading the stars for direction. They understood the subtle language of the wind-sculpted dunes, recognizing ancient pathways in the lay of the sand. Most crucially, they held in their minds the precise locations of hidden water sources, wells known only by specific landmarks or passed down through generations. This knowledge was a closely guarded treasure, the intellectual property that made the entire system work. A caravan master with this expertise could plot a course between oases with the precision of a modern logistician, turning a terrifying expanse into a sequence of manageable, repeatable stages. The camel provided the engine, the saddle provided the cargo hold, and the human mind provided the navigation system. Together, this triad of biological adaptation, practical engineering, and accumulated wisdom did not just make desert travel possible, it made it predictable and therefore profitable. But moving the goods was only half the equation. What happened when these caravans reached their destinations, and how did mere stopping points grow into cities of legendary wealth? Gold and salt are the famous pair, the headline trade that everyone remembers, but to focus only on them is to miss the true, humming complexity of the desert economy. These caravan routes were the internet of their age, moving packets of information, culture, and innovation that were far more valuable than any single mineral. Think of a typical caravan snaking its way across the dunes. Alongside the sacks of salt and chests of gold dust, you would find bundles of silk from China, shimmering in the dry heat. You would smell the rich, pungent aromas of spices from India and Southeast Asia, cloves and pepper and cinnamon, destined for kitchens and pharmacies thousands of miles away. You would see rolls of fine cotton textiles from Egypt and Persia, delicate glassware from Syria, and ingots of iron and copper for tools and weapons. These were the tangible goods, the high-value commodities that justified the immense risk and effort of the journey. But the most transformative cargo was often weightless. It traveled in the minds of pilgrims and scholars, and in the pages of books carefully wrapped against the sand. Religious pilgrims traveling to sacred sites like Mecca or Jerusalem were constant passengers, and their movement carried beliefs, rituals, and theological debates across continents. Even more directly, the routes became conduits for the written word itself. In one direction, the secret of papermaking, a Chinese innovation, traveled westward to Samarkand and beyond, revolutionizing record-keeping and literacy. In the other direction, Greek philosophical and scientific texts, preserved and translated in the Middle East, began their journey back into Europe, carrying the seeds of the Renaissance. A single caravan might be carrying silk for a king, pepper for a merchant, a pilgrim seeking enlightenment, and a copy of a medical treatise that would change how an entire region understood illness. This is the crucial shift in perspective. These networks were not just moving objects, they were moving ideas, and ideas are the most powerful economic force of all. A new weaving technique, a mathematical concept, a religious doctrine, these are intangible goods that, once transferred, replicate and spread, generating value far beyond their original point of departure. The desert did not just trade in things, it traded in the blueprints for civilization itself. Yet, moving such immense value across a lawless landscape invited a fundamental question. How do you protect a fortune on the move, and who guarantees a deal made 1,000 miles from home? This constant flow of goods and ideas needed a place to pool, to transform, and to be redirected. The true genius of the desert trade system lay not in the moving but in the stopping. An oasis was far more than a pit stop for water and rest. It was a dynamic economic engine, a specialized nerve center where raw value was processed into something far greater. Consider a place like Sijil Mossa, a legendary gateway on the southern edge of the Sahara. Here, caravans from the forests of West Africa would arrive laden with gold dust, a cumbersome and inconsistent form of wealth. The oasis city provided the crucial service of refinement. Local experts would melt the dust into uniform, stamped gold coins or ingots, instantly transforming a raw material into a trusted, measurable currency recognized across the Mediterranean world. This act of minting did not just add convenience, it added immense economic value by creating a financial instrument that could be easily counted, stored, and traded. Sijil Mossa became a bank, turning wilderness gold into the hard currency of empires. Further east, a city like Palmyra rose from the Syrian desert not because of what it grew, but because of what it controlled. Sitting at a crucial junction between Roman and Parthian empires, Palmyra mastered the art of logistics and protection. Its merchants did not merely sell goods that passed through, they organized the entire next leg of the journey. They provided armed escorts, negotiated tariffs with desert tribes, and repackaged goods from large, durable caravan bales into smaller lots for regional distribution. Palmyran merchants became financiers, offering letters of credit so a trader could deposit money in one city and withdraw it in another, a revolutionary concept that minimized the need to transport actual coins across bandit-plagued routes. The city itself became a manufacturing hub, taking raw silk from the east and weaving it with local wool to create unique, coveted textiles that commanded premium prices. An oasis metropolis was a place where spices were blended, where glass was shaped, where ideas were translated, and where deals spanning continents were sealed with a handshake. It was a factory, a stock exchange, and a diplomatic summit all operating under the shade of date palms. Perhaps no city embodies this transformative power better than Samarkand, the jewel of the Silk Road in Central Asia. It was not the origin of the silk nor its final destination. Its power came from being the ultimate intermediary. Here, Chinese silk, Indian gems, and Persian carpets converged. Local artisans were famed for their papermaking, a technology acquired from Chinese prisoners of war, which turned the city into a pivotal center for book production and scholarship. Samarkand's workshops would take raw materials and refine them. Its markets would assess and price them, and its banking houses would finance their onward journey to the Black Sea or the Mediterranean. The city amplified value at every turn. A bolt of plain silk entered, and a gold-embroidered garment, a bound manuscript, or a new trade contract left. These oasis metropolises were the capacitors in the circuit of AfroEurasia, storing, stabilizing, and intensifying the economic energy that flowed through the desert wires. They proved that the greatest wealth was not found at the source of a commodity, but at the point where knowledge, skill, and capital converged to reshape it. Yet, with such concentrated wealth flowing through these vulnerable nodes, a pressing question emerged. Who ensured the safety of these caravans, and what unseen agreements kept the peace across 1,000 miles of sand? The real currency of the desert was not gold, but trust. Moving a fortune in silk across 1,000 miles of bandit-haunted wilderness was an act of breathtaking risk. A single raid, a lost camel, or a spoiled water source could erase a family's wealth in an instant. To solve this, the merchants of the sand seas invented something far more durable than any fortress, a financial system built on promises and reputation. This was the world of silent banking, where the most valuable cargo was a piece of paper with a name on it. The most famous of these instruments was called the saftaja. Imagine a merchant in Baghdad wishing to send profits to his family in Cairo. Instead of loading a chest of heavy, vulnerable silver coins onto a camel, he would visit a respected banker. For a fee, he would deposit his coins and receive a saftaja, a letter of credit. This was a simple note, but it carried immense power. It instructed the banker's agent or partner in Cairo to pay the specified sum to the bearer of the note. The merchant would then send this single, lightweight piece of paper via a fast courier or even with a trusted pilgrim. His family in Cairo would present it to the named agent and receive their payment in local currency. The actual silver never moved. What traveled was a promise guaranteed by the banker's reputation across the network. This system did more than just safety. It created incredible speed and liquidity. Money could now move faster than goods, financing new ventures before the old ones had even finished. But the saftaja was just one thread in a much larger financial web. The true architects of this system were the great banking families, whose names became synonymous with reliability across continents. These families, often based in oasis cities or major trade hubs, operated through a network of trusted agents, often family members, stationed in every key market from Spain to India. A merchant could deposit funds with an agent in Damascus, receive a letter, and collect it from a cousin of that banker in Samarkand. This created a proto-banking clearinghouse that spanned religions, languages, and empires. Their word was their bond, and their network was their vault. To manage the monumental risk of outfitting an entire caravan, another brilliant instrument emerged: the partnership contract. A single journey required capital for hundreds of camels, hired guards, toll payments, and the goods themselves. No one merchant, not even a wealthy family, would risk everything on one venture. So they pioneered early forms of investment partnerships. One partner might provide the capital, another would undertake the arduous journey as the traveling agent, and a third might provide warehouse space in the destination city. Profits would be shared according to a pre-agreed formula, spreading both the potential reward and the catastrophic risk of loss. This was not charity, it was sophisticated financial engineering. It allowed for the pooling of capital from many silent investors, funneling resources into ventures of a scale no individual could attempt. These contracts turned caravan trade into a kind of speculative stock market, where shares in a journey could be bought and sold, and a man in Basra could profit from a spice caravan he would never see, simply because he trusted the system and the people in it. Together, the credit note, the banking network, and the partnership contract formed an invisible grid of finance overlaid on the physical map of caravan trails. This grid moved value independently of bulk. It ensured against disaster through diversification, and it created a class of international financiers whose influence rivaled kings. The desert did not just trade in spices and silk, it traded in futures and credit, building the foundations of a global economy on nothing more substantial than trust and a signature in the sand. This financial web required a physical heart, a circuit of immense scale where its principles were tested to their limit. That circuit was the Sahara, a sea of sand so vast it could swallow nations, yet it became the most consequential bridge in the ancient world. Its role was breathtakingly specific, to connect two economic spheres that seemed worlds apart. To the north lay the sophisticated, coin-based economies of the Mediterranean, the Roman and later Byzantine and Islamic worlds, hungry for the ultimate symbol of wealth and stability, gold. To the south, in the regions we now call West Africa, lay the source, the legendary gold fields of Wangara and Bambuk, where gold was panned from rivers and traded in dust by powerful kingdoms like Ghana and Mali. The Sahara did not merely separate these zones, it fused them into a single, interdependent system. Think of it as a colossal economic pump. From the south came the raw, precious metal, often in the form of gold dust carried by donkey trains to the desert's edge. From the north came the manufactured goods and the very concept of standardized currency, salt from mines like Taghaza, copper, fine textiles, glassware, and horses. The caravans, sometimes numbering thousands of camels, were the pistons of this pump. They would depart from southern terminals like Walata or Timbuktu, laden with gold, ivory, and enslaved individuals, embarking on a 2-month journey across the void. They would arrive at northern gateways like Sijil Masa or Tunis, where the gold was minted into dinars, instantly transforming from a commodity into the backbone of Mediterranean and Islamic finance. This flow was not a simple exchange, it was a lifeblood. The gold that reached North Africa stabilized currencies and funded empires, from the Fatimids in Cairo to merchant princes in Genoa. In return, the salt that traveled south was far more than a seasoning. In the tropical regions south of the Sahara, salt was a vital mineral for health and diet, scarce and literally worth its weight in gold. A single block of Saharan salt could be traded for an equal weight of gold dust in the southern markets. This created a perfect economic symbiosis. The southern kingdoms grew immensely wealthy, not by spending their gold, but by controlling its passage. The Kingdom of Ghana, known as the Land of Gold, mastered the art of the intermediary. It did not necessarily mine all the gold itself, but it taxed every ounce that passed through its territory. A silent, deliberate policy kept the actual gold mines a closely guarded secret from northern traders, maintaining an aura of mystery and control. The king held a monopoly on gold nuggets, allowing only gold dust to circulate in trade, ensuring the state retained the most valuable forms of wealth. This system reached its zenith with the Mali Empire and its famed ruler Mansa Musa, whose pilgrimage to Mecca in the 14th century famously demonstrated the wealth generated by this trans-Saharan pump. His caravan included thousands of attendants and carried so much gold that its spending in Cairo reportedly depressed the value of gold in the region for years. His journey was not just a religious act, it was a staggering display of economic power, all sourced from the silent, systematic exchange across the desert. The Sahara, therefore, rewired Africa by making the continent's interior a central player in the global economy. It created cosmopolitan cities like Timbuktu, which became a center of learning and commerce built on desert trade profits. It fostered a shared Islamic culture that served as a common legal and commercial language from the Mediterranean coast to the Niger River. The desert was not a barrier, but a transformative engine, taking raw materials from one world and converting them into political power and cultural capital in another, proving that the most forbidding landscapes can generate the most profound connections. While the Sahara moved gold and salt, another desert network traded in something less tangible but equally precious, the very scent of the divine. Far to the east, the arid mountains and valleys of southern Arabia produced a botanical treasure that would perfume the ancient world, frankincense and myrrh. These aromatic resins, harvested from scraggly trees that grew only in this specific region, became the ultimate luxury good, a substance burned in temples, used in embalming, and sought by emperors. Their journey northward from places like the Dhofar region of modern Oman and Yemen created a web of routes so lucrative they built kingdoms out of thin air. This was not trade for sustenance, but trade for spirit and status, proving that the most powerful economies can be built on something as ephemeral as smoke. The process began in the harsh, fog-drenched highlands where the frankincense trees thrived. Harvesting the resin was a precise art, making small cuts in the bark and returning weeks later to collect the hardened, pearly tears. This raw material, seemingly humble, was about to embark on a transformation. Caravans of donkeys and later camels would carry heavy sacks of this resin north, beginning a journey of over 1,000 miles. The destination was the glittering markets of the Mediterranean world, but the true power was held by those who controlled the path. The route was a series of stages, each controlled by a different tribe or emerging kingdom who levied heavy taxes for safe passage. The incense did not travel freely, it was passed hand to hand, each intermediary taking a share, its value multiplying with every mile it moved further from its source. This concentration of wealth funded civilizations in the heart of the desert. In the south, the kingdom of Saba, legendary home of the Queen of Sheba, rose to prominence. Its wealth was not in vast fields or mines, but in its mastery of the incense trade. Sabaean merchants built sophisticated irrigation systems to support their cities, like Marib with its great dam, creating agricultural plenty in the desert to feed the populations engaged in trade. They did not just tax the goods, they actively managed the logistics, their caravans becoming the primary conveyors of sacred sent to the north. The riches they accrued were poured into magnificent temples and public works, advertising their power and piety to the world. Their control was so complete that classical writers like Pliny the Elder spun tales of fearsome winged serpents guarding the groves, a myth likely encouraged by the Sabaeans themselves to shroud their monopoly in mystery and protect their priceless geographic secret. Further north, where the incense routes reached the fringes of the Roman and Persian empires, another kingdom emerged from the rock, the Nabateans, based in their breathtaking capital of Petra. Carved directly into rose-red sandstone cliffs, the Nabateans were the ultimate middlemen. They controlled the final, critical segment of the route, the point where desert caravans met the Mediterranean shipping lanes. Petra was not an oasis in the traditional sense, but a hydrological marvel, with a complex system of channels and cisterns capturing scarce rainwater. This allowed them to provide the vital water and security that caravan masters needed after the long, final stretch of desert. The Nabateans added immense value by taxing, protecting, and repackaging the incense. They transformed a bulk commodity into a branded luxury, ready for shipment to Alexandria, Rome, and beyond. The tombs and temples they carved, funded by incense profits, stand as a permanent monument to the economic power of fragrance. This trade in aromatics did more than build cities, it created a cultural and informational highway. The same routes that carried frankincense to the Temple of Jerusalem carried ideas, scripts, and diplomatic messages. The kingdoms that grew rich from this trade developed sophisticated systems of writing and administration to manage their complex economies. They interacted constantly with the major empires of the day, from the Ptolemies in Egypt to the Romans. When a new force emerged in the 7th century with the rise of Islam, the groundwork was already meticulously laid. The Prophet Muhammad himself was a merchant, familiar with these ancient pathways. The early Islamic caliphates did not invent Middle Eastern trade. They inherited and supercharged a pre-existing system. The holy cities of Mecca and Medina were already significant commercial hubs on the incense route network. The rapid expansion of Islamic trade across the known world was possible precisely because it expanded upon these deep-rooted, well-maintained Arabian circuits, replacing the idolatrous temple incense with a new spiritual and commercial unity. The desert tracks first worn by the feet of incense bearers ultimately became the pathways for the spread of a world religion, showing how the pursuit of material luxury can quietly prepare the ground for profound ideological change. While the Arabian deserts traded in fragrance and faith, a far more forbidding network was weaving the world's largest landmass together. The true heart of the overland Silk Road was not a grassy steppe or a mountain pass, but a sequence of deserts so extreme they were considered a land of no return. The Taklamakan Desert in what is now Western China, whose name some translate as the place of ruins, and the Gobi to its east, formed a terrifying yet indispensable corridor. These were not simple empty spaces between China and the Mediterranean. They were the central processing unit of the entire system, a 1,000-mile-long filter where cultures, goods, and ideas were forced to mingle, adapt, and exchange. Survival here dictated cooperation on a continental scale. The geography was brutally clear. To get from the Chinese capital of Chang'an to the markets of Samarkand and Persia, you had to either skirt the northern edge of the Taklamakan, clinging to the foothills of the Tian Shan Mountains, or trace its southern rim following the Kunlun Mountains. These were not highways, they were lifelines, narrow ribbons of possibility strung between death, and at every point where a glacier-fed river plunged from the mountains and vanished into the sand, an oasis city bloomed. These were the unsung switching stations of global history, places like Kashgar, Cotton, and Turfan. Think of the Tarim Basin, the vast depression holding the Taklamakan, not as a blank spot on the map, but as a necklace. Each oasis was a jewel, and the caravans were the thread connecting them. A traveler did not cross the desert in one go. They hopped from one secure node to the next. At Kashgar, in the west, you would find the convergence of the northern and southern routes, a bustling Babel of languages where Persian carpets met Chinese silks. Further east, cotton became famous not just as a stop, but as a producer, renowned for its exquisite jade and for becoming one of the first centers outside of China to master the art of silk production itself, breaking a centuries-old monopoly. These cities were more than rest stops, they were permanent marketplaces and cultural laboratories. Because the journey was so long and so dangerous, caravans would often winter at an oasis, waiting for the seasons to change. This meant months of forced cohabitation between Sogdian merchants from Persia, Tibetan traders, Chinese officials, and Turkic guides. In this pressure cooker of isolation, everything was for sale and everything was shared. A Chinese merchant might trade his bolt of silk not for gold, but for a fresh team of Bactrian camels better suited for the next leg. A Sogdian trader, a legendary middleman of the Silk Road, might offer to act as a financial agent, using his network to forward letters of credit. But the exchange went far deeper than commerce. Technologies moved hand to hand. The secret of papermaking, carefully guarded by China, slowly traveled west. It is said that after a battle in the 8th century, Chinese prisoners with this knowledge were taken to Samarkand, where local artisans quickly adopted and improved the technique, soon turning the city into a paper production hub that would supply the entire Islamic world and eventually Europe. Religions flowed along these same sandy channels. Buddhism, traveling from India, found fertile ground in the oasis cities of the Tarim Basin. Magnificent cave temples like those at Dunhuang were carved into cliffs, funded by wealthy merchants praying for safe passage. Monasteries became way stations and libraries, storing not just faith but knowledge. Later, strands of Christianity, in the form of Nestorian believers, carried their faith eastward along these routes, leaving behind stone inscriptions in China. Even Islam would eventually travel these paths carried by merchants and mystics. The desert, in its harshness, acted as a great equalizer and a blender. No single empire could easily control the entire expanse, so power was localized in the oasis cities, which often operated as independent city-states. Their survival depended on being welcoming to all, on providing a neutral ground where differences could be set aside for mutual survival and profit. A Buddhist monk, a Zoroastrian merchant, and a Nestorian Christian could share a meal in a caravanserai in Turfan, discussing astronomy or medicine, because the desert outside cared nothing for their doctrines, only for their preparedness. This constant, slow percolation of people and ideas through the desert artery created a unique hybrid culture in Central Asia, one that was fluent in the languages of multiple worlds. It was this culture that packaged Chinese inventions for Western markets, and that translated Greek philosophy for Eastern scholars. The value added in these oasis cities was not just a markup on silk, it was the translation of civilization itself, proving that the most profound connections are often forged in the world's most lonely and demanding places. The engine that drove this entire continent-spanning network was not found in the desert, but in the palaces and marketplaces of distant capitals. It was a simple, powerful force, human desire for the rare and the beautiful. The imperial courts of Rome, Constantinople, Baghdad, and Chang'an created a relentless vacuum of demand, a suction so powerful it pulled spices, silks, and scents across thousands of miles of wilderness. This was not trade for necessity, but trade for prestige, power, and pleasure, and it funded everything from the camel driver to the king. When a Roman emperor draped himself in Chinese silk, he was doing more than wearing a fabric. He was activating a chain of events that reached into the heart of Asia. His demand created a price, a value so high it justified unimaginable risk. That price traveled backward along the routes like a shockwave, reaching the Sogdian merchant in Samarkand, the Oasis official in Palmyra, and the caravan master loading his camels. Each person in that chain saw an opportunity, a slice of that immense final value they could claim for themselves by providing a service, by moving the coveted object one stage closer to its eager buyer. This demand did more than move goods, it built professions and entire social classes. Consider the humble porter in a Red Sea port unloading sacks of pepper from an Indian dhow. His wage, his family's meal, was a tiny fraction of the gold a Roman aristocrat would pay to season his food. That gold, in turn, paid the ship's captain, who had bought the pepper from a merchant in Gujarat, who had financed a caravan from the Indian interior. At every single handoff, a tariff was paid, a tax was levied, a service was rendered for a fee. The oasis city of Petra grew wealthy not because it produced frankincense, but because it sold security and water to the caravans carrying it, skimming a percentage from a luxury it never grew. This was wealth generation through facilitation, a trickle-down economics powered by distant extravagance. The system reached its most refined form in places like Baghdad under the Abbasid Caliphate. Here, the demand was not just for objects, but for the most exquisite, specialized versions of them. The caliph's court wanted the finest Samarkand paper for its scribes, the most vibrant Byzantine dyes for its textiles, the rarest medicinal herbs from the Himalayas. This sophisticated, discerning demand created a market for quality and authenticity, which in turn incentivized middlemen to become experts. Traders now needed to know not just where to find silk, but which region produced the most resilient thread, which dye master in Persia achieved the deepest crimson. This specialization added further layers of value and employment, from the appraiser who certified a gem's purity to the translator who negotiated a contract between merchant families who shared no common tongue. The wealth concentrated in these urban centers then cycled back into the system, financing the very infrastructure that made the trade possible. A portion of the hefty tariffs collected on silk at the Chinese border funded the garrison soldiers who patrolled the Taklamakan routes, making them safer for everyone. The profits of a Baghdad banking house were reinvested in financing the next season's caravan, a bet on the continued appetite of the elite. This created a self-reinforcing loop. Luxury demand generated capital, which financed logistics, which delivered more luxuries, generating more capital. It was an engine that ran on desire, and it quietly remade the world by connecting the deepest wishes of an empress in Chang'an to the livelihood of a well-digger in the Sahara, proving that the most powerful economic forces are often the most intangible, born from a simple want for something beautiful, rare, and far from home. But who held the keys to these lifelines across the void? The true power on the desert highways did not always belong to the distant emperor or the wealthy merchant. It belonged to whoever controlled the choke points, the single well in a 50-mile stretch, the narrow mountain pass between cliffs, the only fordable point on a seasonal river. This was the gritty, daily reality of the caravan trade, a political economy built on tolls, taxes, and a delicate dance of protection. For the communities living along these routes, the passing caravan was not just a spectacle. It was a harvest, a moving crop of gold and goods to be carefully tended and reaped. The most powerful kingdoms often rose not from conquering vast territories, but from mastering a few square miles of critical geography. Take a place like the Cilician Gates, a narrow, winding pass through the Taurus Mountains in modern Turkey. This was not merely a road, it was a valve. For centuries, it was the only practical land route for armies and merchants moving between the Anatolian Plateau and the Mediterranean coast of Syria. Whoever held the high ground above that pass controlled the flow of everything between Constantinople and Baghdad. They could charge a toll for safe passage, a fee that every single camel and cart was forced to pay. This was not petty theft, it was a sophisticated system of revenue. Local rulers or garrison commanders would issue tariffs based on the type and quantity of goods. Spices paid a different rate than timber, silk more than pottery. They provided a service in return, maintaining the road, clearing rockfalls, and offering a guarded station. This taxation was the lifeblood of small principalities and city-states, funding their soldiers, their walls, and their courts. It was a clean, predictable form of income, far more reliable than raiding. But the relationship was far more complex in the open desert, beyond the reach of any walled city. Here, power belonged to the nomadic tribes, the Bedouin, the Tuareg, the Turkmen, who knew every dune and wadi. For a caravan master, these tribes were both the greatest danger and the only possible safeguard. A tribe could easily descend upon a vulnerable line of camels and take everything, or for a negotiated price, they could provide guides and armed escorts, ensuring safe passage through their territory. This created a tense, symbiotic partnership. The nomadic tribe provided protection from other raiders, essentially selling security. The merchant paid for that protection, viewing it as a necessary business expense, a kind of insurance premium paid in advance. From the tribe's perspective, this was smarter than simple banditry. Raiding was risky and could provoke a punitive expedition from a distant empire. But a regular protection fee paid by every caravan that passed created a steady, renewable income stream. It turned the tribe from a predator into a stakeholder in the trade's success. If the caravan stopped coming, the fees stopped. This economic reality often forged surprisingly stable, if unofficial, treaties between the desert tribes and the great sedentary empires. The empire, whether Rome, Persia, or later the caliphates, needed the goods to flow to fill its coffers and please its elite. It lacked the deep desert expertise to police thousands of miles of trackless sand. So, through diplomacy or payment, it would often reach an understanding with a powerful tribal confederation. The empire would grant the tribe formal or informal recognition, perhaps even a title, and in return, the tribe would guarantee the safety of the routes within their zone. They became the de facto border patrol and highway patrol of the sands. This arrangement shaped state formation in profound ways. The wealth from controlling these transit points allowed nomadic groups to coalesce into more complex political entities. They could afford better arms, attract more followers, and build permanent alliances. We see this in the rise of powers like the Nabateans, who began as nomadic traders and protectors of the incense routes before settling into the rock-cut city of Petra. Their entire state apparatus, their architecture, their writing system, was funded by the taxes and tariffs they levied as masters of the trade corridor. Conversely, for established empires, securing these routes became a primary imperial project. The Chinese Han dynasty's costly campaigns into the Tarim Basin were not about acquiring farmland. They were about controlling the Oasis cities, the way stations on the Silk Road, to tax the trade and deny that revenue to their nomadic rivals, the Xiongnu. The Roman Empire's eastern policy was constantly preoccupied with its relationship with Palmyra and the desert tribes, not for conquest but for commercial stability. The tax revenue from trade was so vital that it could determine the rise and fall of administrations. In this light, the desert was not a lawless space, but a space governed by a different kind of law, one written in water rights and caravan tariffs. The silent, rewired economy of Afro-Eurasia depended on this endless negotiation between the moving and the settled, between the merchant's purse and the guardian's spear, proving that the most valuable real estate in the world was often just a few yards of sand next to a precious spring. Behind every sack of silk and every gold coin was a moving city of people. The caravan was a living, breathing organism, a society on the hoof, and its survival depended on a hidden hierarchy of skill and labor as complex as any in a settled metropolis. At the top was the merchant investor, the silent financier who might never leave his counting house in Baghdad or Cairo, his capital setting the entire venture in motion. But on the ground, authority belonged to the caravan master, a figure of immense practical power. This was not a ceremonial title. It was a job that demanded the combined skills of a general, a diplomat, and a chief executive officer. He negotiated tolls with local chieftains, settled disputes among the travelers, decided the daily marching order, and chose the exact moment to break camp or push forward. His word was law because a single mistake in judgment, a wrong turn or a misjudged water source, could mean disaster for hundreds. Supporting him was a small army of specialists, each a master of their own desert science. The most vital of all were the guides, the human compasses who carried maps not on parchment but in memory. They could read the stars with precision, navigate by the shape of the wind-carved dunes, and recall the location of a specific well marked only by a peculiar rock formation known to their family for generations. This knowledge was a closely guarded inheritance, a form of intellectual capital more valuable than any single load of cargo. Then came the cameleers, the men who understood the temperament and physiology of their animals like no one else. They knew which camel was strongest for the lead, which one needed extra fodder, how to treat an illness with desert herbs, and how to expertly load and balance the precious saddle packs to prevent injury over a 1,000-mile journey. Their skill meant the difference between a healthy, profitable string of animals and a trail of exhausted, worthless beasts. A caravan was also a fortress on the move, requiring its own security force. Guards, often hired from the same nomadic tribes that posed a threat, walked the flanks. Their presence was a deterrent, a signal that this train was prepared and protected. They were experts in the terrain for ambush and defense, and their loyalty, purchased with good pay and respect, was the thin line between safety and ruin. But woven through all these skilled roles was another, far more difficult layer of the workforce: the immense physical labor of loading and unloading tons of goods, of setting up and breaking down camp each day, of fetching water and preparing meals under the blistering sun, often fell upon enslaved individuals. Their forced labor was the unspoken foundation that made the entire enterprise logistically possible, a grim economic calculation that treated human beings as a form of transport infrastructure. This dimension reminds us that the glittering wealth of the silk and spice trades was built upon profound hardship. Yet, despite this stark hierarchy, the caravan fostered a unique, transient culture. Within the rolling community, a Sogdian merchant might share a fire with an Egyptian guard. A Nestorian scribe might treat the wound of a Buddhist pilgrim. Languages blended into a functional pidgin for trade. Stories and songs from a dozen homelands were exchanged under the stars, creating a shared identity of the road. The caravan was a crucible, melting down differences through shared ordeal and mutual dependence. The merchant needed the guide to find the water, the guide needed the guard for protection, and everyone, regardless of status, faced the same relentless sun and the same whispering sands. This interdependent human machine, from the calculating master to the weary laborer, was the true circulatory system of the network. The wires of the desert were not just trails in the sand, they were the collective knowledge, muscle, and endurance of thousands of forgotten individuals, moving forward one heavy step at a time. The most transformative cargo was often the one no merchant ever intended to ship. Alongside the silks and spices, the caravan routes carried a slower, deeper form of exchange: a biological and technological diffusion that would quietly rewire the productive capacity of continents. This was not a trade in goods, but a trade in life itself, in the very plants that would feed nations and the ideas that would reshape landscapes. Consider the humble orange. Its journey began in the forests of Southeast Asia, a bitter, small fruit. Through these networks it traveled westward, first to Persian gardens where cultivation sweetened it, then across the Mediterranean with Islamic expansion. Wherever it went, the orange tree represented more than a new food. It was an economic revolution. It could grow in marginal soils where wheat failed. It provided vital vitamin C, and its high value as a cash crop encouraged the development of sophisticated irrigation systems. The same story unfolded for sugarcane, originating in New Guinea, which traveled to India and then westward with Persian and Arab traders. Its cultivation demanded massive investment in mills and labor, creating entirely new agricultural industries and, tragically, new demands for forced labor that would echo for centuries. Cotton, native to both India and the Americas, saw its Old World varieties spread along these routes from India to the Middle East and eventually to North Africa and Spain. The knowledge of how to spin and weave it traveled with the seeds, creating textile economies that rivaled those of silk and wool. These were not mere additions to a menu, they were fundamental shifts in a region's economic base. A valley that once supported a few herders could, with the right crop and knowledge, support a dense population of farmers and artisans, generating surplus wealth and tax revenue for rising states. The caravan trails acted as the vascular system for this slow, green transformation, carrying the genetic code for future prosperity in a saddlebag of seeds or a cutting wrapped in damp cloth. But the same arteries that carried life could also carry devastation. The same connectivity that moved luxury goods also moved invisible passengers with terrifying efficiency. Microbial stowaways found the caravan routes to be the perfect transmission network. The most stark example is the Black Death of the 14th century. While its precise origins are complex, historians widely note that the pandemic likely traveled along the Silk Road from Central Asia. Fleas carrying the plague bacterium lived on black rats, which were themselves constant, unwelcome companions in the grain sacks and food stores of caravans and ships. As merchant communities moved from one oasis city to another, they inadvertently brought the illness with them. The disease did not respect the boundaries of empires or the wealth of merchants. It moved at the speed of trade itself, from the bustling ports of the Crimea to the crowded cities of Italy and beyond. The economic impact was catastrophic, depopulating entire regions, collapsing agricultural output, and causing severe labor shortages that, in the long term, would reshape feudal structures and empower workers in Europe. This was the dark side of connection, a reminder that the wires carrying wealth could also carry profound collective hardship. Yet even in the wake of such loss, the flow of practical knowledge continued, offering tools for rebuilding. Technologies moved as deliberately as any spice. The stirrup, likely developed in Central Asia, traveled westward, revolutionizing cavalry warfare and, by extension, the political order of medieval Europe. The windmill and Persian invention for grinding grain spread along these routes, harnessing a new form of energy. But perhaps the most profound was the systematic transfer of water management knowledge. The Qanat system, an ancient Persian method of tapping groundwater through gently sloping underground tunnels, spread from Persia across North Africa and even to Spain. This technology allowed settlements to bloom deep in arid zones, turning deserts green and creating agricultural havens that sustained trade hubs for centuries. This exchange of biological and technological code fundamentally altered what was possible. A region's wealth was no longer solely determined by its native resources or its position on a map, but by what it could successfully adopt and cultivate from the global library of life and innovation carried on the hoof. The silent rewiring of Afro-Eurasia was thus not just financial or cultural, it was ecological, changing the very ground beneath people's feet and setting the stage for the next great phase of human interconnection. The real treasure was knowledge, and it traveled light. While gold and silk filled the saddlebags, the most transformative cargo was often a bundle of paper or a carefully memorized message, moving at the speed of a camel's steady gait. This network was the ancient world's information superhighway, carrying news, diplomatic treaties, scientific discoveries, and sacred texts across continents with a reliability unmatched by any other system of its time. A merchant in Damascus could learn of a political shift in Central Asia months before any official envoy arrived by sea. A scholar in Cairo could access astronomical observations recorded in India. This constant flow of data turned the caravan routes into a living nervous system for Afro-Eurasia, where information itself became the most valuable commodity of all. Nothing illustrates this better than the journey of a single technology, paper. In China, paper had been a state secret for centuries, a revolutionary medium far superior to heavy clay tablets, fragile papyrus, or expensive parchment. Its journey westward is a classic story of how the desert trade rewired the world's intellectual infrastructure. According to historical accounts, the knowledge crossed the Taklamakan desert not through trade, but after a military engagement near the Talas River in the 8th century. Among the prisoners taken by the victorious Abbasid forces were Chinese artisans skilled in papermaking. These individuals were brought to the thriving Silk Road city of Samarkand, which already possessed all the key ingredients: abundant linen and hemp for pulp, and clear, flowing water. The local craftsmen, renowned for their ingenuity, did not simply copy the technique, they improved it. They pioneered the use of linen rags to create a stronger, more versatile sheet. Almost overnight, Samarkand became a paper production powerhouse. This was an economic and cultural earthquake. Before paper, knowledge in the Islamic world was recorded on papyrus, which was brittle, or on parchment, which required the skins of countless animals and was prohibitively expensive for large-scale book production. Paper from Samarkand changed the equation. It was durable, relatively cheap to produce, and could be made in large quantities. This democratized access to the written word. Suddenly, it was economically feasible to run a large bureaucracy, to keep extensive commercial records, and most importantly, to copy books on an unprecedented scale. Libraries like the legendary House of Wisdom in Baghdad could amass hundreds of thousands of volumes. Scholars could afford personal copies of texts. The vibrant book markets of cities like Baghdad and Cairo became possible because of this steady supply of affordable paper from the East. The caravan routes had not just transported a product, they had transferred an entire information technology, shifting the very medium of thought and administration. This flow was a two-way street, as paper technology filtered westward, reaching the Muslim parts of Spain by the 12th century. The content written on that paper flowed in all directions. Greek philosophical and scientific works, long preserved in Syriac and Arabic translations, began their journey back into Europe on sheets of Samarkand paper. Medical texts from Persia, mathematical concepts from India, and geographic knowledge from Arab travelers were compiled, copied, and carried along these same networks. A single caravan could be carrying bolts of silk, bags of pepper, and a chest containing a translated copy of Ptolemy's work on astronomy, each item destined to reshape a different aspect of the receiving culture. The merchant was often unknowingly an agent of intellectual diffusion. His need for accurate navigation aids spurred the collection of geographic data. His reliance on contracts and credit notes encouraged advances in mathematics and accounting. The system, built for commerce, became the backbone for a centuries-long transfer of the ancient world's collective knowledge, setting the stage for later renaissances in both the Islamic world and Europe. The silent wires of the desert carried the current that would eventually power the lights of human understanding. This sprawling, self-organized network could not escape the attention of empires. For any ambitious state, these desert highways presented a tantalizing opportunity, a ready-made system of wealth generation that simply needed to be plugged into the imperial grid. The relationship that followed was a complex dance of patronage and control, one that would amplify the trade scale while subtly shifting its center of gravity. The Abbasid Caliphate, upon establishing its magnificent capital of Baghdad in the 8th century, did not invent the trade routes. It consciously built its new city at their crossroads. Positioned between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, Baghdad was a deliberate hub, a spider at the center of a web stretching from the Mediterranean to China. The Abbasid state became the ultimate patron, investing in infrastructure like caravanserais, standardizing currency, and promoting a legal framework based on Islamic commercial law that provided a common language of contract from Cordoba to Samarkand. This security and predictability supercharged the existing networks, drawing merchants and scholars from across the known world to its vibrant markets and libraries. Yet this patronage came with a price, a gentle redirection of wealth. The immense tax revenues from this trade now flowed into the caliph's coffers, funding the splendors of Baghdad and Samarkand, centralizing cultural and economic prestige in the imperial core. The wealth of the deserts was now being used to build glorious cities of brick and stone, monuments to imperial power funded by the dust of the caravan trails. This process reached its most dramatic scale under the Mongol Empire in the 13th century. The Mongol conquests were devastating, yet in their aftermath, they engineered something unprecedented, a century of enforced stability across the entire span of Eurasia, known as the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace. For the first time, a merchant could travel from the Black Sea to the Yellow Sea under a single, if stern, political authority. The Mongols, pragmatic rulers, saw the immense value of the trade flowing across their domains. They actively secured the routes, hunting down bandits and building relay stations with fresh horses for official messengers, which also served merchants. They standardized weights and measures and offered protective passports called paisi to traveling traders. This drastic reduction in risk and transaction cost caused the volume of overland trade to surge. Ideas and technologies moved with new speed, from the transfer of Persian administrative techniques to China, to the journey of a young Marco Polo from Venice to the court of Kublai Khan. But again, this imperial peace had a centralizing pull. The legendary wealth of the Silk Road was now funneled toward the Mongol capitals, first Karakoram and later Khanbalik, modern Beijing. Tribute and tariffs from a dozen subject kingdoms converged there, making the Great Khan's court the wealthiest node in the entire network. The empire did not just protect the trade, it became its primary beneficiary and director, ensuring the lifeblood of continents nourished the heart of the Mongol state. A similar story unfolded in West Africa with the rise of the Mali Empire in the 14th century. Mali's rulers, most famously Mansa Musa, did not create the trans-Saharan trade, but they mastered its economics with brilliant statecraft. They secured the southern termini of the routes, bringing key cities like Timbuktu and Gao under their control. By providing stability and punishing raiders, they guaranteed the safety of the caravans arriving from the north, which encouraged more traffic and higher volumes of trade. The empire grew fantastically rich from its gold fields and its control over the trade in salt and copper. Yet Mansa Musa's legendary pilgrimage to Mecca was also a strategic economic act. By spending so much gold in Cairo and Medina, he was not just displaying piety, he was intentionally inserting Mali into the financial consciousness of the wider Islamic world, advertising the reliability and wealth of his kingdom as a trade partner. The wealth generated, however, was increasingly concentrated in the imperial cities. Timbuktu transformed from a seasonal camp into a permanent center of commerce and legendary scholarship. Its great Sankor mosque and universities built with gold from the trade. The empire's control meant that the profits from the desert pump were increasingly spent on monumental architecture, a centralized bureaucracy, and a lavish court, rather than being dispersed evenly along the routes. The silent wires now carried power directly to the throne. This imperial co-option was a double-edged sword. It brought scale, security, and cultural flourishing, but it also meant the free-flowing, decentralized network of independent oasis cities and tribal agreements was gradually tied to the fortunes of a few powerful capitals. The desert's economic energy was being harnessed, magnified, and ultimately redirected to build the very empires that would one day be eclipsed by new routes across the ocean. But a shadow was growing on the horizon, a new kind of ship rising from the waves of the Indian Ocean. From the 9th century onward, the caravan routes faced a quiet, relentless competitor that would slowly rewire the world's economic circuits once more: maritime trade. The economics were brutally simple. A single, sturdy how sailing the monsoon winds between India and the Arabian Peninsula could carry a cargo that would require 1,000 groaning camels. For the first time, the desert's greatest strength, its ability to funnel and control high-value goods, met a challenge it could not outrun: sheer volume. The maritime routes began to siphon away the lifeblood of the overland system, the lucrative bulk trade in spices. Pepper, cinnamon, cloves, these were not just luxuries, they were commodities consumed in massive quantities across the Mediterranean and Middle Eastern world. Transporting them by camel was a matter of precious weight, each sack a significant portion of a beast's load, with its cost multiplied by every toll gate and every mouthful of fodder along the way. A ship, by contrast, was a floating warehouse. Its hold could be packed with tons of pepper, its operating costs spread across that immense volume, making the price per pound plummet. A merchant in Alexandria could now buy spices that had arrived by sea for a fraction of the cost of those that had come overland. This was not an immediate collapse, but a slow, decisive tilt. The caravan routes remained vital for goods where land was still faster, or for luxury items like silk where weight was low and value was astronomically high. But the steady, heavy flow of spice wealth, the reliable profit engine that had funded oasis cities and desert kingdoms, began to chart a new course across the water. The maritime network offered other advantages too. While a desert journey was a battle against scarcity, a sea voyage, though perilous, moved between ports that were often major population centers themselves, creating more direct links between producer and consumer. The rise of powerful maritime sultanates in places like Gujarat and the Malabar coast in India, and later the Swahili city-states of East Africa, created new hubs of capital and power that operated independently of the desert's logic. These ports grew fat on the spice trade, their wealth built not on controlling oases, but on mastering the monsoon winds and building deep water docks. This shift did not erase the caravan routes, but it redefined their purpose. They became specialists rather than generalists, focusing on the trades where they still held an edge, like moving silk, jade, and horses, or connecting regions the ships could not reach, like the interior of Africa. The overland network, which had once been the undisputed backbone of intercontinental exchange, was now one option among two, and often the more expensive one. The silent wires across the sand were still humming, but a new, louder signal was being broadcast from the sea, setting the stage for a competition that would ultimately be decided by a voyage no caravan could ever make, a journey all the way around the world. The desert wires did not simply go silent when the winds shifted to the sea. Instead, they adapted, finding new and vital roles in a world where bulk goods now traveled by water. The caravan network pivoted from being the sole highway to becoming an essential specialist, a last-mile delivery service for a globalizing economy. Its new strength lay precisely in what the ships could not do: reach the interior. While Dhows unloaded pepper in Aden or Hormuz, it was the camel trains that carried those spices inland to Damascus, Cairo, and eventually to the courts of Central Asia. The caravans became the crucial link between the bustling new maritime ports and the vast, landlocked empires and cities that still hungered for the world's goods. A merchant in Samarkand might now receive his spices via a circuitous but cost-effective route by sea to the Persian Gulf and then overland from Basra, a hybrid journey that kept the desert routes financially alive. This adaptation demanded a shift in cargo. With maritime transport dominating cheap, heavy commodities, the caravans focused on what they still did best: move items of astonishing value in remarkably small packages. The economics of weight became paramount. A single camel could now carry a fortune not in pepper, but in luxury textiles like brocaded silks or intricate Persian carpets, whose artistry multiplied their worth far beyond their physical bulk. It could carry precious stones, delicate glassware, and most importantly, books. The written word became a premier caravan commodity, its value lying entirely in the knowledge inscribed on lightweight paper, making it perfect for overland transport. The same logic applied to human travelers. Pilgrims journeying to Mecca, Medina, or Jerusalem represented a steady, reliable form of traffic. Their passage required services, guides, and safe lodging, generating income for Oasis towns along the holy routes. Scholars and diplomats carrying ideas and treaties also relied on these secure land corridors. The caravan system morphed into a network for high-value, low-weight cargo, both material and human. This persistent utility is powerfully illustrated by the continued rise of desert cities even in the age of sail. Take the example of Aleppo in Syria. As maritime trade flourished in the Mediterranean, Aleppo thrived not as a port, but as the definitive inland terminus. It was where the sea routes ended and the caravan routes into Anatolia, Persia, and Mesopotamia began. Its massive khans, or merchant compounds, were warehouses where Indian spices, Persian silks, and European woolens were traded and redirected. Its wealth in the 16th and 17th centuries was a direct result of this adaptive role, serving as the critical hinge between ocean and desert. Similarly, in North Africa, cities like Fez and Marrakesh remained powerful commercial and cultural centers by controlling the trans-Saharan trade in gold and enslaved individuals, a commerce that ships on the Atlantic could not yet replicate or reach. The caravans continued to pump gold northward, now often used to purchase European goods arriving by sea, creating another hybrid loop. The network proved its resilience by becoming indispensable to the very empires that also used ships. The great land-based empires of the early modern period, the Ottoman, Safavid, and Mughal, were colossal consumers. Their capitals, deep inland at Istanbul, Isfahan, and Delhi, required a constant flow of luxuries, arms, and intelligence to sustain their courts and armies. Maritime trade could bring goods to their coastal edges, but only the ancient caravan routes could reliably deliver them to the heartland. The Ottoman Sultan's court relied on silk from Persia and spices from Egypt, all funneled through caravan networks that they meticulously protected and taxed. The desert and mountain passes became the empire's internal supply lines, their enduring importance reflected in the continued construction of massive caravanserais along these roads well into the 17th century. These were not monuments to a dying tradition, but investments in a still vital circulatory system. The silent rewiring of earlier centuries had created an infrastructure so deeply embedded, so flexible, that it could not be simply abandoned. It found a new equilibrium, proving that true networks do not vanish when challenged. They transform, finding the currents they are uniquely suited to carry. Even the most resilient system has its breaking point. For over a millennium, the caravan networks had weathered shifting empires and rival routes. but in the centuries following the Mongol peace, a perfect storm of environmental and political change began to sever the silent wires. The first pressure came from the sky itself, a climatic shift known as the Little Ice Age, beginning roughly in the 14th century, brought cooler temperatures and unpredictable rainfall patterns across the globe. In the desert heartlands, this was not about snow, but about a delicate balance being disrupted. Oases, those life-giving nodes, depended on a consistent trickle of water from mountain glaciers and underground aquifers. As precipitation patterns faltered and some glacial sources diminished, the water table in many regions began to drop. Springs that had flowed for generations slowed to a muddy seep. Wells had to be dug deeper, and some were abandoned entirely. The margins of cultivation shrank. An oasis that once supported a bustling caravanserai and date palm groves might see its fields wither, forcing the community to shrink or disperse. The cost of maintaining the infrastructure of trade, of keeping cisterns full and gardens productive, grew higher as nature's subsidy was withdrawn. The desert, always a demanding partner, became even less forgiving, raising the baseline risk and cost of every journey. As the environmental foundation trembled, the political superstructure fractured. The collapse of the unified Mongol Empire in the 14th century shattered the Pax Mongolica. In its place arose a patchwork of rival khanates and emerging states, often in conflict. The safety guarantee that had allowed a merchant to travel from the Black Sea to Beijing under one authority vanished. Now a caravan master faced not a single set of rules and tolls, but a dozen. He needed separate negotiations and payments for safe passage through the territory of the Timurids, the Golden Horde, the Mamluk Sultanate, and a host of smaller principalities. Banditry, once suppressed by Mongol patrols, resurged as central authority broke down. The cost of insurance, of hiring larger guards, and of paying multiple, often arbitrary tariffs, ate further into the already thinning profit margins of overland trade. The network's efficiency, built on predictability, was replaced by uncertainty and escalating transaction costs. While the interior routes grew more difficult and expensive, a new economic gravity was pulling the world's attention toward its edges. The rise of Atlantic economies, powered by the voyages of European explorers and the establishment of direct sea links to the Americas and Asia, fundamentally redirected global flows. Why finance a risky, months-long caravan for a few chests of pepper when a Portuguese carrack could sail directly to the source in India and return with a hold bursting with it? The silver mined in Spanish colonies in the Americas flowed across the Pacific to China, bypassing the Silk Road entirely. This was more than competition. It was a wholesale rerouting of the planet's economic circuitry. The center of gravity for global trade shifted decisively from the Afro-Eurasian interior, with its camel trails and oasis cities, to the port cities on the Atlantic and Indian Oceans, Lisbon, Seville, Amsterdam, and later London. Capital, innovation, and political power followed this gravitational pull. Investment now poured into shipyards and naval cannons, not into caravanserais and well digging. The great banking families that had once financed desert caravans now turned their attention to underwriting oceanic voyages and colonial ventures. The economic energy that had for so long pulsed along the desert wires was being systematically siphoned away to power a new maritime system. The result was not a sudden, dramatic end, but a quiet fading. Caravan traffic did not stop overnight. It continued for centuries in a diminished form, servicing local and regional needs, maintaining the pilgrimage routes to Mecca, and carrying goods where ships could not go. But the era of the caravan as the primary engine of intercontinental exchange, as the silent rewirer of civilizations, was over. The great oasis cities like Palmyra had already fallen to ruin centuries earlier, and now others, like those along the central Silk Road, saw their cosmopolitan markets grow quieter. The deep, specialized knowledge of the desert guides began to fade as fewer young men saw a future in the trade. It was a slow-motion collapse, less about a road being closed and more about the world choosing to travel by another, faster road, leaving the ancient tracks to be reclaimed by the very sands that had once defined them. The legacy, however, was anything but silent. The cultural, biological, and technological connections those routes had forged became a permanent part of the human story, a foundation upon which our modern world, for all its speed, was ultimately built. History is written in the sand, but it is also buried beneath it. The story of these vast, silent networks has not been passed down in a single chronicle, but painstakingly reassembled from fragments, from the physical debris of commerce and daily life left behind in the most unlikely places. To understand how we know this grand narrative, we must follow the archaeological trail into the ruins of the desert itself. The most dramatic evidence stands as silent skeletons against the sky, the remains of the great Oasis cities. Walking through the colonnaded streets of Palmyra or the rock-cut facades of Petra, you are not just looking at beautiful ruins, you are standing in a fossilized marketplace. The layout of these cities speaks a clear economic language. Wide, column-lined avenues were not for grand parades alone. They were designed for the easy movement of camels and carts. The massive, fortress-like caravanserais within their walls, with their central courtyards for unloading and stabling animals, were the equivalent of secure freight terminals and hotels. The temples and tombs, funded by trade tariffs, are the receipts of this wealth, carved in stone for eternity. Further east, in the Taklamakan desert, the dry air performed a miraculous act of preservation. At sites along the Silk Road, archaeologists have uncovered entire settlements frozen in time, their wooden timbers and woven textiles intact. They found forgotten way stations with storerooms still containing millet and dried fruit, the supplies for the next caravan. They unearthed personal belongings, a comb, a child's shoe, a love letter, reminding us that this network was made of individuals with hopes and mundane needs. Perhaps the most intimate evidence comes not from stone but from paper. In the late 19th century, a hidden library was discovered sealed inside a cave at Dunhuang, on the edge of the Gobi Desert. This chamber, forgotten for nearly 1,000 years, contained tens of thousands of manuscripts, scrolls, and paintings. Here was the paper trail of the Silk Road, a chaotic archive that included Buddhist sutras in Chinese, Manichaean prayers in Sogdian, Nestorian Christian texts in Syriac, and commercial contracts detailing the sale of a camel or the loan of silver. This single cache proved, in stunning detail, the incredible religious and linguistic diversity that flowed along these routes, and the everyday business that sustained it. A similar treasure was found in the attic of a synagogue in Old Cairo, known as the Geniza. For centuries, the Jewish community there deposited any paper with the name of God, including personal letters, legal deeds, and merchant accounts, rather than destroying it. This accidental archive offers a hyper-detailed snapshot of the medieval Mediterranean and Indian Ocean trade world. Through these fragments, we meet the merchants themselves. We read their worries about shipments, their instructions to partners, and their family news. We see the financial instruments, the letters of credit and partnership contracts, in active use, moving money and goods from Spain to India. The physical network also left its own signature on the landscape. Across Iran, Anatolia, and Central Asia, the sturdy remains of caravanserais dot the old routes, spaced roughly a day's journey apart, about 20 miles. Their uniform design, a square wall with a single gate for security, surrounding a courtyard and stables, shows a systematic, almost corporate approach to infrastructure, likely sponsored by empires to encourage and control the flow of commerce. Even the earth yields economic data. Hoards of coins buried for safekeeping and never retrieved tell a geographic story. The discovery of Roman gold coins in southern India, or Chinese copper cash in East African Swahili towns provides irrefutable proof of direct or indirect contact, mapping the reach of monetary spheres. By analyzing the wear on these coins, historians can even trace the velocity of money, how quickly it changed hands across vast distances. Each piece of evidence is a single pixel. A shred of silk in an Egyptian tomb, a Chinese ceramic shard in a Kenyan dig, a camel bone in a midden heap outside an oasis. It is only when we step back that the full picture emerges, a continent-sized circuit board, its connections etched by countless journeys. This story was not written by kings for glory, but by merchants for profit, and it is recorded in the humble, durable leftovers of their world, waiting in the sand for us to listen. These ancient tracks left a ghost in the machine of global history, an economic imprint so deep it still guides the flow of wealth today. The most obvious legacy is the map itself, the persistent zones of cultural and commercial exchange the caravans forged. The entire Islamic world, from West Africa to Indonesia, still shares a profound connectivity that began not just with faith, but with trade, law, and credit networks standardized along those desert highways. Shared commercial practices, a common language of contract, and even dietary preferences spread along those routes, creating a durable economic community that predates modern borders. Similarly, the Sahel region of Africa, that belt of land south of the Sahara, remains a distinct cultural and economic zone because it was the southern shoreline of the trans-Saharan trade for a millennium. The cities, languages, and trade relationships that crystallized then continue to influence politics and commerce in the region to this day. These are not just historical curiosities, they are active economic realities, shaped by the logic of camels and caravans centuries ago. Perhaps the most profound legacy is the very blueprint for globalization. The caravan networks created the first operational model of a long-distance, interdependent world economy. They proved that specialization worked on a continental scale, that a region could prosper not by producing everything it needed, but by excelling at one thing and trading for the rest. They developed the financial tools, from letters of credit to investment partnerships, that would later finance the age of sail. They normalized the idea that luxury, spice, and knowledge could and should come from a world away. When Portuguese captains rounded the Cape of Good Hope, they were not discovering a new world so much as they were seeking a cheaper, faster way to plug into a system that already existed, a system whose rules and desires had been written by overland trade. The Caravan Age built the economic software that the Maritime Age would then run on a grander scale. If you want to see the ghost of the caravan most clearly, look at a modern satellite map. The lines we draw today often trace the old whispers in the sand with an eerie precision. Major highways across the Sahara frequently follow the same corridors between oases because the logic of water and passable terrain has not changed. The routes of oil and gas pipelines across Central Asia and the Middle East are not random. They snake through mountain passes and avoid the most formidable deserts, mirroring the choices of Silk Road merchants. Even the placement of modern cities often reveals their caravan ancestry. A bustling metropolis in a seemingly illogical location makes perfect sense when you realize it was once a critical caravanserai or a tax collection point on a forgotten trade route. The ancient paths became dirt tracks, then roads, then railways, their purpose evolving but their foundational geography remaining stubbornly constant. The desert wires were never truly severed. They were just upgraded, their silent hum replaced by the roar of engines, yet still carrying the lifeblood of connection along the same ancient grooves. The lone merchant, a solitary figure against the endless dunes, is a powerful mirage. Our romantic vision of a single brave soul guiding his camels to fortune is a story the desert itself would laugh at. The truth is far less poetic and infinitely more impressive. This was not an age of adventurous individuals, but the birth of a system, a sprawling, collaborative, and shockingly modern form of capitalism that operated on a continental scale. The real protagonist was not the man on the camel, but the invisible web of contracts, partnerships, and logistical plans that moved him. Think of it not as a journey, but as a corporation whose office stretched from the Mediterranean to the Pacific. A merchant in Venice did not simply pack a bag and head east. He would invest in a commenda, a formal partnership contract. He provided the capital, while a traveling agent, often a younger family member or a trusted associate, undertook the perilous journey. Profits were split according to a precise, pre-agreed formula, spreading the immense risk. This agent, upon reaching Aleppo or Antioch, did not then wander into the desert alone. He would join a scheduled caravan, a moving fortress organized by a professional caravan master who charged fees for protection, guides, and the collective bargaining power of a large group. This master himself answered to a syndicate of investors back in the city. At every major oasis, the traveler would rely on the local agent of his home banking house, using a letter of credit to draw funds without carrying heavy coins. He sold his goods not to random strangers, but to other professional merchants in dedicated warehouse districts, their prices set by distant market reports carried by faster couriers. Where is the lone romantic in this flowchart? He is a cog, albeit a vital one, in a machine of breathtaking complexity. The caravans moved on timetables dictated by seasonal winds and mountain pass conditions. The goods were insured through distributed partnerships. The payments were guaranteed by financial instruments that moved value faster than the goods themselves. This was a world of double-entry bookkeeping, legal arbitration for trade disputes, and standardized weights and measures across cultures. The silk you bought in Rome came with an invisible chain of receipts, contracts, and promissory notes that stretched back to a mulberry grove in China. This system was capitalism in its earliest, most sophisticated global form, quiet, collaborative, and ruthlessly efficient. It rewired the world not through the daring of one, but through the organized trust of thousands, proving that the greatest journeys are never taken alone. So the story ends not with a bang, but with a quiet, permanent hum in the background of history. The desert caravan routes performed a slow, deep rewiring of Afro-Eurasian economies, a transformation so profound it feels like a geological process. They did not merely connect points on a map, they created the first truly continental market, a single, pulsating system for goods, capital, and ideas that stretched from the Atlantic shores of Africa to the Pacific coast of China. This was not just trade, it was integration. For the first time, the price of pepper in Rome could be influenced by monsoon winds in India, and the value of gold in Mali could shape monetary policy in Cairo. A financial instrument written in Baghdad could be honored in Samarkand, and a philosophical text preserved in a Persian library could find its way to a scholar in Spain. The deserts, by their very harshness, forced this system into existence, demanding a level of cooperation, standardization, and trust that had never been attempted on such a scale. This network was the original operating system for a connected world, proving that economies are not built on resources alone, but on pathways and on the shared agreements that make movement possible. The legacy of these sandy tracks is a testament to a specific kind of human ingenuity, one focused not on conquering nature, but on listening to it and collaborating across it. They read the stars for direction, they memorized the language of the dunes, and they turned the camel, a biological marvel, into a transcontinental freight engine. They built cities in the most improbable places, not with conquest, but with the logic of logistics, understanding that the greatest value is often added at the point of exchange, not the point of origin. This entire sprawling achievement stands as the indispensable, quiet precursor to the globalization we know today. Every container ship crossing an ocean, Every digital financial transaction flashing across a screen, every stream of data connecting continents, follows a blueprint written in the sand centuries ago. The caravans established the fundamental principle that distance is not a barrier but a cost to be managed, and that diversity is not an obstacle but a source of wealth and innovation. They taught us that the world could be a single marketplace, so the next time you see a modern map of trade routes, or consider the astonishing speed with which an idea can now circle the globe, look past the obvious networks of steel and fiber optic cable. Look for the older, quieter lines, the ones drawn by thirst and wind, by the collective memory of guides and the trust of merchants. Our world is still shaped by hidden infrastructures, by the choices of where to place a well, or build a warehouse, or extend a line of credit. The silent rewiring of the desert never truly stopped. It just changed form, reminding us that the most powerful connections are often the ones we learned to make when the challenge seemed greatest and the landscape most empty.